Okay, so welcome to Saving Tomorrow's History and Sharing Our Digital Treasures. And I'm really excited to share this work, as the collections that are at the Dorset History Centre are really fascinating. And I've had the opportunity of being able to go there and have a bit of a behind the scenes glimpse, and also be able to touch some of my kind of ancestry history and documentation from the 1700s. So it's a kind of wealth of amazing things that you have there. So I'm going to hand across to Sam and Cassandra from the Dorset History Centre to talk a bit about what goes on there and how we're preserving our history. Over to you guys.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Hello, yes, I'm Sam Johnston. I'm the Service Manager for Archives at the Dorset History Centre. I'll call that DHC as we go through for short. So welcome to our virtual guide to Dorset History Centre. The service is based in Dorchester and incorporates archives, museum development and local studies library services. We're jointly funded by Dorset Council and BCP Council. And I'd like to talk a little bit about DHC and its work, and then hand over to my colleague Cassandra, who will explain some of our digital activities and aspirations. As a start of a 10, we'd like to ask everyone watching this to write in the chat box one word that they'd associate with archives, anything you like at all. Anything that comes to your head, and we'll have a little look at those later. So feel free to chuck something in there now if you would. Archives are our recorded history, the evidence of who we are and what we've done, whether on paper, parchment, film or digital formats. Archives tell stories and allow us to analyse and understand the past and hopefully to learn from it, although that's not always the case, of course. The collections at DHC, all with a Dorset theme, all with a Dorset theme, are constantly being added to and date back to AD 965. If you live in Dorset or have family or other ties here, then hopefully we'll have something within the collections that casts light upon your personal history. Here you can find things as varied as designs for pool pottery, 18th century parish records, the correspondence of Thomas Hardy, photographs of Purbeck quarrying, the accounts for the building of the Portland breakwater, or the architectural plans for the Eldridge Pope Brewery. Archives should provide an authentic voice, that which is based on evidence rather than opinion. Archives will of course be interpreted in different ways by those who view them, but they do provide the bedrock for historical analysis and research, without which everything else would be based on living memory, which in most of us tends to be fairly fallible. Collecting archives falls into two basic strands. There are those people and organisations who seek us out in order to donate or deposit collections they think have a value. And there are those we need to actively seek out and try to acquire from, because we feel that future generations will be interested in the information contained within those records. This could relate to legal matters, providing interesting evidence, or simply be an important part of our culture. In other words, what makes us who and what we are. We have to be selective about what we take in. Although DHC holds 45,000 boxes of material and many gigabytes of data, space is limited, and the material that we preserve has to be able to offer some future value, whether that be in the form of written or image-based records. How do we make things available? The service preserves on the one hand and encourages access on the other. Those are our two key functions. Anyone can come in and look at our collections on site at the History Centre. Even when the restrictions brought about by COVID, it's still possible to make an appointment to do this. We undertake community engagement work. It's really important to us that the wider community can access collections and can in turn contribute their records to form part of the county's collective memory. We work with individuals, community groups, museums and libraries, and the arts sector, schools and universities to encourage their use of collections. We share information about the collections online via our website, catalogue, Twitter and blog, and you can also find huge quantity of our material on ancestry.co.uk. If you want to tweet us, then it's at Dorset Archives. How do we manage the collections? Our oldest document, you can see it here in this slide, dates back to the year 965. It's made from parchment, which is animal skin. These sorts of materials are very resilient and can last for hundreds of years in the right conditions. We put all our paper and parchment documents in our secure temperature and humidity controlled strong rooms and protect them from fire and theft. The way people create and store information has changed enormously in the last 30 years. A lot of information is now created in an electronic format and does not exist at all in hard copy form. We call this born digital. Our information culture has changed hugely in a relatively short space of time. We no longer get the great exchanges of correspondence, the diaries, or the manuscript minute books. Instead, our communication is via email, tweets, texts, and spreadsheets. Much has been written about the information black hole, the gap between where physical records were succeeded by the digital and where our actual ability to properly manage and preserve that digital content has yet to catch up. We hope at the DHC that we're doing our small part to prevent the black hole getting any larger, although it's a big task and digital preservation is still in its relative infancy. Digital preservation archivist Cassandra will share what challenges we are facing with modern media, born digital records, and how we're future-proofing the county's archival memory.
Thanks, Sam. Hello, everyone. I'm Cassandra. I'm the digital archivist at Dorset History Centre, and that means I'm responsible for looking after all the weird and wonderful formats in our collections. So at the start, we asked you for a word that you associate with archives, and from the responses you put, there was mentions of heritage and the past, but I doubt that any of you kind of had images like this that popped into your head when you think of archives. So storage has evolved to include a whole range of removable media servers and online providers now, and many media formats are not designed for long-term storage. And all types of storage come with a degree of risk that the media will be lost or corrupted, or that software needed to access information will become obsolete. How many people still have a floppy disk drive or a VHS player or even a CD drive these days? And it's not just the storage that is a challenge. There is now an incredible amount of information being created every day, as you can see in this infographic. Since 2013, the amount of information in our digital universe has increased tenfold. And obviously we don't want to, and nor could we, keep everything for the foreseeable future. We need to identify what is important to reflect the lives of the people of Dorset, the decision-making that impacts them, and the way our environment is changing. So in the last few years, we've taken in many born digital archives, including oral history, community newsletters, photographs, and film from all around the county. Some of these we have proactively sought out, but mostly we are dependent on people in our communities offering things to add to our collections. So next time you're involved in a project that might be interesting to future generations, then please get in touch and we really love to hear about it. So what about capturing events that are happening right now? A great example of our proactive collecting approach is how we are capturing coronavirus. When the pandemic escalated, we want to ensure that the Dorset dimension of it is reflected in our collections. We initially focused on taking weekly snapshots of the Dorset and BCP Council's web pages relating to coronavirus. These web crawls demonstrate the response to a rapidly changing situation, and this one you can see is from April this year. It is easy to forget how much changed so fast in those early weeks of the pandemic, so it's great to have a record of that. We also wanted to capture normal people's experiences during these strange times. In April, we put out a call with the Lighthouse in Poole, and we requested that people keep diaries in whatever format they wished through the period of lockdown and coronavirus. We received nearly 150 responses from members of the public, all expressing an interest in participating. These offered us a cross-section of Dorset society, young and old, men and women, and people with different professional perspectives, including frontline workers and retirees. All had an experience they wanted to record, and we were thrilled that so many offered their diary for future use. We have been in regular touch with the diarists, and in May we shared some extracts from the diaries on our blog, and some of which you can see here. We are aware that for many this strange period is not over, and some may want to continue recording their thoughts. Others feel that with the end of lockdown, so the natural end of their diary arrived. And of course, either view is fine, and we look forward to adding the diaries to our collections in due course. So how do we keep our county's memory alive and accessible? The first step for obsolete media like film and VHS is to digitise the content. This film is from Ewan Minster in 1918 and is part of the Windrose Rural Media Trust collection. This collection dates back to 1905 and includes so many snapshots of life in Dorset throughout the 20th century. As an archivist, I shouldn't really have favourite collections, but this is definitely one of mine. Windrose are currently digitising much of their collection previously inaccessible on VHS and film. And I'm really glad that they're doing this now, as transferring the older formats particularly is becoming increasingly challenging, as the skills and equipment to do so are vanishing. So great, we are collecting lots of fantastic digital material in all sorts of ways. But how do we keep it all safe and make it available for people to study or enjoy. So we use an active digital preservation system called Preservica to securely store and manage our digital archives. Preservica makes several copies of files, monitors files for corruption, and can migrate files to new formats if necessary. But there is very little point in us collecting and managing all these lovely things if no one ever sees them. So we recently launched our revamped online catalogue, and this is where you can search for items that are relevant to whatever research you are undertaking. The catalogue mostly contains descriptions of records that we hold in our collections, but increasingly we can provide access to digital content alongside the catalogue record, such as oral history recordings exploring the experiences of LGBTQ+ people. The project to increase the discoverability of our collections is ongoing. Future plans include more geographic-based searching, facilitating virtual volunteering, and launching digital exhibitions. We will also be adding more digital content like the beekeeper film we saw before. But systems like Preservica don't come cheap, so I'm going to share some tips for you to manage your own digital information. And this can be anything from research notes to family photos or emails and financial spreadsheets. And to illustrate this, we have some photos from one of my other favourite collections, that of Weymouth photographer Graham Herbert. So firstly, you need to know where your information is. Do you have equipment lurking about? Is all your information online? Do you have backups on CDs or external hard drives? It's good to know where it is. So secondly, is what you've got properly labelled? Make sure all your files and folders have descriptive file names. And you might want to write a summary document of your most important documents and delete things you no longer need as you go along. Once you know what you have, it's a good idea to make at least 2 copies of all the files you feel have long-term value. One copy can stay on your laptop or computer, and the other can be put onto CDs, portable hard drives, or in internet storage. Store the copies in different physical locations if possible. Then if disaster strikes in one location, your other data should still be safe. And check your files at least once a year to make sure you can read them. And finally, if you have any documents that potentially have historical value, then talk to us about depositing them. With digital information, the earlier you act to preserve your documents, the better. You could say it's a race against time.
Thanks, Cassandra. It's an exciting time to be an archivist, honest it is. It's still relatively early days for the digital preservation of digital archives, and we expect there to be many developments over the coming years, which will speed up the efficiency and volume by which we can acquire and manage this material. A bit like farmers using a horse-drawn binder moving across to tractors. We think everything will become much more efficient in due course and automated. In the short term, we're looking forward to hosting a digital archive trainee funded through the National Archives next year as part of the programme to increase diversity in the archive sector. And we'll continue to keep on technological developments in digital preservation so we can keep up with the times. I thought I'd close this session with an image of one of my favourite things from the collection. Cassandra's had her go, so I'm having mine. This is a superb 16th century map from the Banks of Kingston Lacy Archive collection. Everybody loves a map, I think. A beautiful thing in itself, but also a useful one, and remarkably accurate given that it was created without the benefit of satellites or sophisticated modern cartographic techniques. We hope that this whistle-stop tour of DHC has been useful, and it may have caused you to think about how you manage your records and whether what you are now creating and how it might be of interest to future generations. What will your informational legacy be? Keep us in mind for research, community projects, and if you have anything of interest historically, that is, in whatever format, then please do get in touch. To learn more about the History Centre, please follow us on Twitter, visit our blog pages, or sign up to our regular newsletters. Just coming back to what Cassandra asked you to do earlier, if it'd be possible, type into the chat bar another word, perhaps a revamped version of what you were going to say earlier, into the chat bar to see how you would define archives. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam and Cassandra. That's a big coincidence that you picked the map of the Purbeck. That's where I grew up, and I was trying to spot on that map where that might have been, but I couldn't quite see, too small on the screen. If anybody has any questions for Sam and Cassandra about the work of the History Centre, or about any of the collections that go on, please do put some in the chat. We have one already. Pierre, did you want to put your mic on and ask, or would you like me to read out your question? Oh, no, Mike. Okay. Oh, yes. Sorry, you did say earlier. Apologies for that. So are there any kind of issues in terms of the formats that you're preserving this stuff in, and whether people can access those on their computers and devices? So Pierre had some challenges with that. So do you kind of try and use sort of file formats and things that last the test of time? How do you do that?
Yeah, we do. I think the bigger problem is that it's such a tiny percentage of our collections that are actually digital. So still the vast majority of things in our collections are paper or parchment, and we haven't digitized them all, and we can't possibly digitize everything. As Sam said, we've got loads and loads of boxes, so we couldn't possibly digitize everything. So the amount that you can see a digital version of is quite small, but we kind of migrate to standard formats for all those digital things, so PDFs or JPEGs or that kind of thing that everyone should be able to see.
And we have another question coming in terms of how do you handle the multiple location to preserve copies of unique archives? Did Andy, would you want some more? Is that enough, or did you want Andy to come in on that?
Yeah, a little bit more clarity, please, on that.
Well, it's just the advice that you were giving about storing backups of your things, and obviously, I mean, I have seen a presentation on the Banks archive, which has got some beautiful, unique stuff in it, and the maps and things you show. Those are irreplaceable. So do you have archives, and do you keep them off-site elsewhere?
No, we don't. Not presently. All our hard copy collections are stored in Dorchester in the one repository building. Obviously, the work that Cassandra does with Preservica means that our digital content is stored on the cloud, although Preservica does it in a particular way, which means that multiple copies are created and checked. She could say more about that, but no, the hard copies are in Dorchester in one place, and we don't currently have any outstores.
So, Sam, do you ever show the collections? Do you ever kind of put different ones on show then, appreciating that there's so much?
We tend to work in terms of actually presenting the collections to the wider world. We're not really set up as a museum type environment at the History Centre, but we do work with museum staff as close as possible. So, for example, with the Banks archives that were mentioned, a lot of it went on display, or some of it rather went on display at Kingston AC itself, in the course of our project. And we do welcome accredited museums coming to us to put content on display, because archives support object displays very well. The two things work together. So yes, as much of that sort of thing as possible. In fact, one of the items from the Banks archive I can boast gently is heading off to the Louvre in Paris later this year, I think, for a display that they're putting on next year, because some of the mapping that's included relates to a French explorer of Egypt.
Wow, that's awesome. And what do you think are your most popular collections then?
The most popular collections, I think, are the ones that relate to family history.
Family history.
That's why a lot of the content is on Ancestry has already been digitized. Things like the parish registers, which we would love to show in their original format, but if we did, they'd simply fall to bits. So digital access has a massively important role in helping preservation, because if we all looked at the same physical object time after time, it would simply disappear, which is often what's happened in some instances. The text has become very faint. So I think it's family history still that's probably sort of ahead in terms of popularity. But I think as more material is digitized and people become more aware of some of the collections that are held, particularly the visual stuff, there's some beautiful collections held there which haven't really seen the light of day yet. I think those will catch up in due course.
That's brilliant. Now you've got a at Dorset History Centre, haven't you? Twitter, at Dorset Archives Twitter. and you do send out a newsletter. I'm sure I've seen
Yes, that's
news
right.
from you guys go out as well.
So it goes out at least once a month. You can sign up to it from the council's newsletter webpage. So you can click on and select our newsletter, and obviously the more that do, please, we'd be delighted to share information with everybody. Yeah.
Brilliant. Any last questions for Cassandra and Sam? Pete's just said how awesome the picture going to the Louvre is. Pierre's just coming back in. Preservica owns the data, ? Or is it just software that could be obsolete too?
So no, we own all our data in Preservica. The contract is set up so if they go out of business or we want to transfer into another system, then there's contractual obligations that mean that all our data gets transferred back to us or into another system. So that's kind of covered, we hope.
Brilliant.
It is.
Excellent. Oh, that's great. It's been really great to hear about the work that you're doing. There's so many, it's fascinating, all the collections that you have there, and I definitely recommend people to have a look at your site and have a bit of a dig around what's there. So we'll kind of wrap that up now. Just to everybody else, don't miss out on Futurefest. There's other sessions still available, and if you missed out on yesterday, you can catch up on the YouTube recordings or visit our festival web pages. But just a big thank you to everybody for their questions, and for Sam and Cassandra for sharing the History Centre's work with us.
Pleasure. Thank you.